At the class reunion, he arrived with his successful career and a beautiful girlfriend. She said, "If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be the wife of the green group now." He sat across from me, his arm around his girlfriend, his expression cold. That's all in the past. The crowd, unfazed, egged him on. Under his gaze, I quietly covered the scar on my wrist and forced a smile. Yes, we are long past it. 1. I remember, it was Kimberly Carter who suggested the breakup, right? While his girlfriend was in the restroom, the classmates began gossiping. Kimberly is me. Jeremy Green sat opposite. His lips curled in a faint smile, but his eyes were icy cold. This was our first meeting in 6 years. Everything felt a bit sudden. I came only because the class president said Jeremy wouldn't be there. I never expected to run into him here. Now, Jeremy is a successful and prominent young entrepreneur in the city, a returnee with impressive credentials. Dressed in a suit, he looked handsome. Even the watch on his wrist was worth a fortune. Everyone admired him. In contrast, I had fallen far from grace. Indeed, it was her who initiated the breakup. Jeremy answered the crowd's curiosity with calmness. People had their own speculations. Perhaps they thought I was materialistic, couldn't endure hardship, picked the wrong person, and ended up losing everything. Kimberly, I heard the guy you were with later ended up in prison, right? And you even took on his debt. You must be here to ask for money at this reunion. Among the jeers, Jeremy's calm and deep-set eyes remained fixed on me, silent. I awkwardly smiled and said nothing. The door opened and Jeremy's girlfriend walked back in. Sensing the odd atmosphere, she asked with a smile, "What happened while I was gone?" Jeremy broke his silence, gently taking her hand. "Nothing, just catching up." She took her seat with composure, her gaze fixed on me as she smiled, revealing her dimples. "Jeremy mentioned you to me. If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be the wife of the green group now." Many in the room seemed to relish the drama. Back then, the Carter family was at its peak, and wherever I went, I was the center of attention. That envy didn't fade with time. Instead, it became their excuse to kick me while I was down years later. Jeremy's voice cut through the awkwardness, cold and unyielding. "That's all in the past." The crowd fell silent, understanding that the big shot didn't want to continue the topic, and they started talking about other things. His girlfriend toasted to me, "Thank you for letting go. Make sure to come to our wedding." I covered the scar on my wrist silently and replied blankly, "Congratulations." 2. Why didn't you explain things to him? On the phone, my best friend Angela was indignantly defending me. The reunion ended early, and I stood outside in the cold wind, exhaling a cloud of breath. "He has a girlfriend now." There was a pause on the other end. "He has a girlfriend now?" Angela asked, incredulous. "Yes." Classmates left in small groups, and the streetlights cast reflections on the snow, resembling shattered glass. "It's a shame you finally got to see him, after all this effort." Angela, no one waits forever. Some things, if not said at the moment, only serve to make things worse if brought up later. The cold wind made my eyes sting and I blinked away tears. I gave up. Even after struggling for years to pull myself out of the mire and wanting to reunite with him in the most dignified way, it was too late. "All right, we'll talk when you get back." The temperature had dropped below freezing before the spring festival, and taxis were hard to come by. I stood there for a while, my hands frozen, my phone displayed, waiting in line. High heels clicked behind me, accompanied by a woman's gentle voice. "Jeremy, the snow is beautiful. It's cold outside. Go to the car, I'll join you soon." Jeremy's voice was unmistakable. "Then hurry up." As the woman passed by, she gave me a meaningful look. She then walked to a nearby car, opening the door, revealing a glinting bracelet on her wrist. It was the Green family heirloom. It used to be on my wrist, but when we broke up, I had someone return it to Jeremy. So she wasn't just his girlfriend, she was his fiancée. With the crowd gone, only he and I remained. The taxi I hailed still hadn't arrived. Jeremy stood behind me in silence. We remained silent, shadows overlapping under the streetlight. My thoughts drifted back to that night when we broke up, and Jeremy had a car accident on his way to see me. His brother called, his tone harsh. "Jeremy's in the hospital. Is his life in danger? Would you have come if it were? Please take care of him." Kimberly, he got a chance to go abroad and will eventually succeed. Why couldn't you wait a bit longer? Do you really need money so badly? Everything he did for you, you could never repay in several lifetimes. Have you forgotten all that? His brother was almost in tears, barely restraining himself from calling me an ungrateful wretch. The phone was suddenly snatched away, and the call ended abruptly. I can say I abandoned him. It's understandable that he would hate me. How much do you owe? Jeremy pulled me out of my memories, his tone cold. It's none of your business. I inhaled the cold air, my throat sore from the alcohol, and started coughing uncontrollably. The cold air stung my throat painfully. I bent over, holding onto the streetlight, the alcohol churning in my stomach, making me tear up. Jeremy stood beside me, watching coldly. The taxi finally stopped in front of me, the driver leaning out. Going to Wanha Mansion? Yes. I steadied myself, took a breath, and reached for the car door, but was suddenly grabbed by the arm and dragged away. Caught off guard, I collided with Jeremy's embrace. He asked, "What are you going there for?" Wanha Mansion was a wealthy area, and it was not easy to get in. I roughly tried to push Jeremy away, but he grabbed my wrist in return. His body's heat pressed against my skin, reaching my chest. I struggled a bit but couldn't break free, looking up at Jeremy's dark and unreadable face. "Mr. Green, what do you want to say?" He pressed his lips together, his black eyes deep and calm, hiding his emotions. The cold wind howled, messing up my hair. I forced a smile and voiced his thought. "You think my money is dirty, don't you? Is 50,000 enough?" Jeremy cut me off with a cold face. "What do you mean?" A hint of mockery finally appeared in Jeremy's eyes. "Isn't money what you need? 50,000, 100,000, not enough for you to come and take." I suddenly raised my hand, and the sharp sound of a slap echoed through the night. Jeremy's face bore a clear 5-finger mark. A woman's scream came from afar as she rushed out of the car. "Live your life well and don't overreach." I threw down the words and left in the taxi. 3. Did you hit him? Angela poured me a cup of hot water. Yes. He wanted to support me financially. I curled up on the couch, enduring wave after wave of stomach cramps, and slowly sipped the water. After a while, I suddenly turned and ran to the bathroom to throw up. Angela patted my back. "Drinking with a bad stomach." I took a few breaths, wiped the water off my lips after rinsing, and felt a fiery pain in my esophagus. Was it worth it, liking him for so many years? I looked up at my reflection in the mirror, my lashes wet, my black hair clinging to my forehead, and my face a bit pale. Angela's grumbling came from far away, not entirely clear. "If you hadn't been so heartless and broken up with him, he wouldn't be where he is now." I thought about Jeremy's fiancée. Compared to me, she had a brightness and cheerfulness I vaguely remembered having many years ago. But later I fell so hard that when I crawled out of the pit, everything had changed. When Angela finished with her work at Wanha Mansion, we walked hand in hand on the way back to my rented apartment. I suddenly received a call from Jeremy's brother. "Kimberly, if you're in trouble, I can arrange a job for you." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "They're getting married next month. Michelle Thompson is a nice person, and her family is well off. I won't disturb him anymore. Don't worry." He was silent for a moment, then futilely explained, "We just want Jeremy to be well." Okay. Friends from back then, without exception, stood on Jeremy's side. After the call ended, Angela's eyes were red. "They don't understand anything. It's okay. Since I still needed to stay here for a while, I found a job not far from home." During the interview, the HR person asked suspiciously, "Do you have depression?" "Not anymore. I have a doctor's certificate." Previous companies had rejected me due to this issue during background checks. This company was smaller, and that evening I received a job offer. I thought the class reunion would be the last time I'd have any interaction with Jeremy, but 3 days later, Jeremy landed in our company and became my boss. And my workstation was moved to the door of Jeremy's office. "I refuse." "Fine," Jeremy said without looking up, coldly. "Submit your resignation to HR." I laughed in anger. "You're firing me just because I won't switch positions?" He paused, finally looking up to speak with me. "I'm just giving you a choice. Do you think I want something from you?" I was momentarily speechless, remembering how Angela had argued over a bit of rent the night before, and forced a smile. Mr. Green, you're so noble, I naturally have no fear. Jeremy nodded slightly. Thank you. Close the door when you leave. Also, the chair needs to face away from me. I don't want to see your face. For the rest of the time, we had almost no interaction. A week later was the company team-building event. As the newcomer, I was forced to drink too much. Kimberly, if you don't drink, your salary will be deducted. Don't worry, we'll take you home when you're drunk. We're all women, what's there to fear? The manager laughed and persuaded me to drink. Amidst the crowd's cheers, I downed the last drink of the night and collapsed on the table unconscious. The next morning, I woke up in a large bed. Bright sunlight made it hard to open my eyes. I propped myself up, the blanket falling away to reveal the soft bathrobe I was wrapped in. I was stunned for a moment, then got up and walked out. In the bright living room, Jeremy was lounging in a hotel bathrobe, reading the morning paper. When he saw me, he glanced up briefly. You're awake. Breakfast is on the table. Eat and then go back to sleep. A chill swept over me and my face went pale. Jeremy tossed the morning paper onto the coffee table, slightly opening his collar to reveal an intimate hickey. Unfortunately, last night, you were the one who initiated things. I was struck like lightning with no recollection of last night. That's impossible. Jeremy placed a contract in front of me with my fingerprint on it. The general content was that I would be his lover, and he would pay me $100,000 a month. This can't be my fingerprint. Is that so? Jeremy laughed lightly. Are you sure? Facing his serious and calm gaze, I opened my mouth but couldn't say a word. He ignored my discomfort and took out a voice recorder. I accidentally recorded your monologue last night. Miss Carter, would you like to hear your dirty thoughts? I shivered as if falling into an ice cellar. A wave of immense shame engulfed me. These thoughts, even hidden, felt filthy. Now they were being used as evidence, as if I had committed a crime. Jeremy's eyes were lowered, obscuring his emotions. Coveting another man's wife. TSK, Kimberly. How about sharing this recording with them? I clenched my hands tightly, my nails digging into my palms. Are you taking revenge on me? Yes, he answered casually. You didn't want me to be well, so why should I let you be well? Two choices. Either fulfill the contract, or I make the recording public. The clock in the corner ticked away, matching the beat of my heart, each tick resonating in my ears. My lips were cracked and I looked up numbly. Then make it public. Under his cold gaze, I said numbly, Jeremy, I won't be a third party. Jeremy looked at me seriously and smiled. Kimberly, who do you think you are? Do you still have the right to choose? 4. In the bathroom, I found my disheveled clothes. Jeremy's clothes, however, were neatly hung on the coat rack by the door, starkly contrasting with mine. The scene before me was painful to see. I sighed, silently changed into my clothes and left the hotel. Angela called, her voice strained. Kimberly, they're asking for $500,000. The sky was overcast, and the sun was nowhere to be seen. To pay for my treatment, Angela had saved very little money, and my savings were pitifully small. They said if you don't pay, they'll expose your situation, and they won't tell you where your aunt's belongings and ashes are either. I'll try to advance part of my salary and borrow a little more. I should be able to make up the amount by next month. Okay. After some hesitation, I dialed a number. It took a while for the other end to pick up. Miss Carter, what can I do for you? I exhaled and said, Dr. Collins, I'm sorry to disturb you, but… Eric Collins seemed busy on his end. After some shuffling, he finally reached a quiet place and asked patiently, Are you in trouble? I took a deep breath. Could you lend me $400,000? This was my first time asking to borrow money, and I felt like I was on fire after speaking. Suddenly, there was a commotion on the other end. Dr. Collins, emergency surgery. I understand. I didn't hold much hope and prepared for him to hang up directly. At the last moment, Eric briefly said, Send me your bank account number. I'll transfer the money within today. Then the call ended. The sky remained overcast. The cold busy signal suddenly felt warm. In the evening, the manager tapped on my desk. We're having dinner with clients tonight. You'll come along. A few hours earlier, I had just advanced a month's salary from him. Adding the borrowed money and my previous savings, I barely managed to gather the $500,000. When we walked into the private room, I saw Jeremy. He mingled effortlessly with everyone, his tall figure moving gracefully through the crowd. The light from the crystal chandelier highlighted his handsome profile. The manager gently pushed me forward. Immediately, all eyes were on me. "Mr. Green, is this one of your employees?" Jeremy glanced casually and smiled. "Yes, a newcomer." "What kind of newcomer needs Mr. Green to personally accompany them?" "She seems good-looking." During the casual conversation, everyone took their seats. The manager arranged for me to sit next to Jeremy and whispered, "Be sharp tonight. Drink when you're supposed to." The guest subtly asked, "Mr. Green, can your new employee drink? Or not?" Before Jeremy could answer, the manager hurriedly replied, "She can drink, she can drink." He then pushed a wine glass towards me. "Let's start with a toast." Jeremy smiled silently, lightly tapping on the table. I picked up the glass, steeled myself, and drank it in one gulp. The spicy liquor surged into my esophagus, igniting a fire and churning in my stomach. Everyone cheered, ready to keep the party going, but Jeremy shifted the topic. Where were we? Let's continue. The atmosphere was lively, and many people wanted to toast Jeremy. He excused himself, claiming a bad stomach and not drinking at all. In the end, all the drinks ended up in my stomach, thanks to the manager's relentless efforts. I could no longer bear it and went to the bathroom. The sink faucet was running, and I dry-heaved continuously. My hair fell loose and got wet in the sink. After sending a message to Angela, I was completely drained, my head hanging over the sink as I gasped heavily. Footsteps approached slowly outside the door. The door was pushed open. I thought it was a woman coming to use the bathroom, but then Jeremy's voice came, calm and collected. "Can't hold on anymore?" Gathering my remaining strength, I stood up unsteadily and tried to leave, but Jeremy grabbed my arm and dragged me back. His large hand touched the back of my neck, burning with heat. "Let go of me." Stomach acid burned my throat, making every word I spoke painful. Jeremy effortlessly dragged me to the mirror, made me face it, and lifted my chin, sneering. "Take a good look at yourself. Don't you fear being targeted by ill-intentioned people looking like this?" In the mirror, my eyes were moist, my cheeks flushed, and my hair was a tangled mess. My collar was undone. Jeremy looked through the mirror, his deep gaze indiscreetly assessing my body. I closed my eyes, shivering slightly. "Who could be more ill-intentioned than you?" Jeremy chuckled and kissed my ear. "Come back with me tonight, okay? Get off." He ruthlessly covered my mouth, suffocating me as he squeezed the air from my lungs. Blood fueled by alcohol felt like boiling magma, crashing wildly through my body. The light blurred into a haze, and the water droplets felt like they were separated by a film. Each drop was like sulfuric acid dripping onto my heart. It was unbearably painful. I sweated profusely, weakly hitting him. It felt like being dragged back to those dark days. Desperately, I stared at this dazzling world, feeling utterly out of place. "Jeremy, can you let me go?" I was silently falling, crashing into the bottom of a well. Probably hurt, but I couldn't feel it. "Kimberly." Jeremy was calling me. His eyes no longer held the hatred that wished me dead. He was panicked, so much so that I couldn't tell if the person before me was the young Jeremy or the present one. I said, "Jeremy, I never want to see you again." 5. The high fever came on fiercely. My mind was in a haze and my whole body ached terribly. I curled up under the covers, shivering uncontrollably. Outside, the north wind howled. In my daze, I dreamed of the past. I was lying on Jeremy's back asking, "Jeremy, what if I die?" He walked steadily with me on his back, gently reassuring me, "Don't say that. It's just a fever. You'll be fine after the injection. Hey, do you have enough money for living expenses? Injections are expensive." "It's okay." "How can it be okay? How many jobs are you working?" Jeremy didn't answer. He placed me at the nurse's station, crouched in front of me, and said seriously, "As long as you're safe and sound, I don't care what happens to me." I was huddled in a thick down jacket, troubled. "When Mom and Dad stop fighting, I'll ask them for money to pay you back." Jeremy patted my hair, his gaze gentle. Trust me, we'll have money in the future. But I didn't remain safe and sound as he hoped. That night, when Jeremy went out of town for a competition, I returned home and pushed open my parents' bedroom door. Dad was holding another woman in his arms. My glamorous life began to collapse from that moment. Then came the fierce arguments between my parents, Dad leaving without a word, and the Carter family drowning in debt. One night, a group of middle-aged men came to collect the debt. The swaying ceiling light, the men's excited shouts, the dull pain and nauseous sensation on my skin, and my mother's heart-wrenching curses mixed into a chaotic mess in my mind. The mirror seemed to have been set to fast forward. Mom was driven to her death in the bathtub by the creditors. Angela found me, disheveled and scantily dressed, and took me to the distant South City. On a rainy day, I huddled in a corner of the hospital, wearing morning clothes, looking disheveled. She has a family history of depression. Are there any relatives? Angela looked at me with concern. There's a boyfriend, but he's out of town for a competition. Have him come over, said the doctor, mixing in some professional jargon. She's showing clear suicidal tendencies, and treatment will be very difficult. She'll need constant care for years. The family should be prepared for a long battle. At that time, my mental state couldn't support me in reporting the incident to the authorities and seeking justice. Angela and I were like two stray dogs. We abandoned everything and fled from the place we had known all our lives. On the same day, Jeremy's name was at the top of the competition's winners list. He won a spot to go abroad. He called. When I answered, the sound of howling wind came through the line. Kimberly, Jeremy's voice was extremely gentle, I'll keep my promise. 3 years from now, I'll marry you. I looked at the slowly closing iron gate, unable to find the way back home. Jeremy, I may not be able to be with you. I fought back tears and they fell quietly. He held his breath. Why? I opened my mouth, hesitated in that moment. His future was bright. Was I really going to selfishly confine Jeremy's later years to the rainy South City? Outside the window, a girl cried uncontrollably behind the bars. The boy's face showed sorrowful numbness and disgust. I saw the love disappearing from his eyes, a sight that was utterly despairing. The wind lifted my hair, revealing the bruises and marks on my neck. I wiped my tears and said, Jeremy, you stay well. Let's just leave it at that. 6. The ticking of the medical equipment was in my ears. The sunset filtered through the blinds, casting a beautiful golden light on the nearby sofa. I blinked, the nightmare slowly fading away, and I sat up. The man was sitting on the sofa, quietly peeling an apple. His fair, slender fingers were deft, and soon, a perfectly whole apple appeared. Smooth and clean. It was Jeremy. He heard the noise, looked up, met my gaze, silently stood up and pressed the bell. The doctor quickly walked in, checked my pupils, confirmed I was fine, and then said to Jeremy, She's not getting enough nutrition. She should focus on supplementing her diet with some protein. Jeremy nodded. Thank you. The door closed. He walked to the bedside, handed me the apple and said, Don't think about anything. Just focus on getting better. I didn't take it but instead got out of bed and searched the cupboard. My phone was missing. There were no clothes to wear either. He allowed me to rummage around the ward. Jeremy, what are you planning to do? I stood barefoot on the floor, a beam of sunlight streaming in, reflecting my pale, haggard face on the glass. What do you think I want to do? Jeremy placed the apple on the bedside table, took out a tissue and slowly wiped his hands. I want you. He sat in the light, his black eyes openly staring at me, his gaze intense and humiliating. I trembled, gripping my hands tightly. Jeremy, you can't do this to me. Jeremy stood up, took 2 or 3 steps to stand in front of me and looked down, smoothing my hair. Why can't I? I have someone I like now. Please stop pursuing me. Is that so? Jeremy's face held no smile. He cupped my face, leaned in and stopped his lips just a centimeter away from mine. I couldn't escape him. As I turned my head, I closed my eyes and uncontrollably shivered. Jeremy laughed, his cold voice seeping into my ears. Kimberly, you're lying. 7. The private hospital was located on the outskirts, with endless woods outside the window. I couldn't leave and couldn't contact anyone. I had tried to seek help from doctors and nurses, but they said they couldn't do anything. Jeremy came every day. Most of the time it was in the evening. He would arrive dusty and tired and talk to me for a while. I resisted his affectionate gestures, and Jeremy didn't push it. Lately, I had been dreaming frequently of the past. Back then, I would constantly mention Jeremy's name. I said, "Jeremy, you're going to be very successful in the future." Jeremy would sigh silently and ask, "What flavor of milk do you want today?" "Banana." To buy me banana milk, Jeremy, the top student, skipped class for the first time and got caught by the teacher. Later, we went to college. Rumors started spreading about him and the school's belle. I took the subway for more than 10 stops, crying outside the boys' dormitory. Jeremy dressed hurriedly in the middle of the night, came downstairs and gently wiped my tears away, saying, "Don't cry. If you want me, I'm yours. In the future, only you." That's not how confessions work. He was stunned, hugged me tightly and said, "I love you." At that time, we probably couldn't have guessed that the situation would be like this years later. Tomorrow, I'm getting married. The sunset outside hadn't yet fallen. The warmth still lingered. Jeremy's voice pulled me out of my distant thoughts. "Is there anything you want to say to me?" I stared at his face, holding half a cup of milk. I suddenly understood why I had been dreaming so often recently. I was saying goodbye to the past Kimberly and Jeremy. The news of him and Michelle was on TV every day. Golden boy and girl. A match made in heaven. That had once been the future we envisioned. But now, Kimberly was mired in debt. What right did I have? "Congratulations," I said. "May you have a son soon." Jeremy's hand stopped peeling the apple. The knife grazed his finger, quickly oozing fresh blood. He froze for a moment, took out a tissue to press on it, and smiled down at me. "It's okay. It's just a formality with her. Do you want children? I have no objections." "Jeremy, can we just end it here?" I suddenly felt very tired. "Let's keep our dignity." Jeremy stopped peeling the apple, threw the things back into the fruit basket, and stared at me with a trace of sarcasm. "Just end it here? Why? It started with you. Now with just one sentence you've grown bored and left easily. What am I supposed to be? A dog?" I closed my eyes, dispelling the halo of sunlight on my vision. "Then I'll return it to you." Jeremy froze. "What did you say?" I looked at the setting sun. "If you don't want me to be happy, I can go die." Suddenly my chin was gripped and my head was turned. I met Jeremy's eyes filled with rage. "Kimberly, are you out of your mind? If you wanted to die so badly, why didn't you do it earlier?" I don't remember when he left. That night, Jeremy's brother, Adam, also a friend from many years ago, burst through the door. "Kimberly, what did you promise me?" He questioned me aggressively, leaving me dazed. "Do you know how much Jeremy will lose by breaking off the engagement? You're an adult now. Can't you stop being so selfish and let Jeremy handle everything? Can't you think about him? What's wrong? What's wrong?" Adam's anger turned into a laugh as he shouted at me. "Jeremy is calling off the engagement because of you. And you're asking me what's wrong?" My ears were buzzing, sitting there in a daze with a blank mind. Where did that leave me, the third party ruining someone else's family? Adam forcibly dragged me out of bed. "You used to be good at this. If you're bored with it and have a new interest, just say any excuse you want." "Adam." "Kimberly." Adam was shaking with rage. "If you don't come back, would these things still happen?" His roar echoed in the snowstorm, the north wind howling, freezing all my senses. My ears were buzzing, unable to hear anything. His gaze was unprecedentedly filled with hatred, as if I deserved to die. "Adam, it's him who won't leave me alone." Adam's face turned cold. "After we settle this, I'll take you away." The office building was brightly lit late at night. Adam dragged me inside, but unfortunately, the press conference had already started. Jeremy sat calmly under the spotlight. "I heard the reason for your broken engagement is a third party?" Facing the reporter's questions, he was composed. "There were some differences between Miss Thompson and me. We decided to part ways peacefully." Adam's face turned ashen, gripping my wrist tightly to prevent me from moving. "But according to insiders, you've rekindled with your first love." Jeremy remained calm. "Those are just rumors. If there are no other questions, today's press conference will end here." Just as he stood up, someone suddenly shouted, "She's here." That's her. All the cameras turned toward me instantly. I was exposed under the spotlight, looking embarrassed and bewildered. Reporters swarmed in, and in a few seconds I was surrounded tightly. Questions came one after another. What is your relationship with Jeremy? Did you really interfere in someone else's marriage? The click of cameras was relentless. Jeremy's smile suddenly froze. He stood up, parted the crowd, and walked toward me. No, I didn't. I weakly protested, but my voice was quickly drowned out by their insatiable curiosity. Questions came one after another. There's new information. A reporter shouted in excitement, holding up a phone with my voice on it, sounding tearful and hazy with drunkenness, like a delirious whisper. Jeremy, I love you. It was a recording. I was filled with panic. I once thought nothing could make my life worse. When the storm truly hit, I was completely destroyed. Isn't this just a mistress? Shameless. Whispers among the crowd slapped my face like a blow. The color drained from my face instantly, and the recording nailed me to the pillar of shame. I'm sorry. Adam, get her out of here. Jeremy pushed through the crowd, his face showing panic for the first time. My vision went white. I heard someone reading out loud word by word. Her father was in debt, her mother committed suicide, and she has a severe family history of depression. She's been in a mental hospital in South City for 5 years. Isn't that mental illness? A stone stirred up thousands of waves. The crowd was in an uproar. Why does a mental patient come out to harm others? Is she sick? Why doesn't she just die? Jeremy's steps halted. He looked up at me. Shock, confusion, incredulity. I sat helplessly amidst the noisy crowd, my blood slowly turning cold until my whole body was frozen. Kimberly. Jeremy was calling my name, his voice trembling. I knew what was coming next. I just waited calmly for the guillotine to fall, to completely destroy my life. She has also been violated. This was the last sentence of the anonymous tip. As soon as Jeremy heard it, his face turned as pale as paper. 9. Jeremy's perspective. Since that day, Jeremy had not spoken a word since coming back from the company. The blinds had been closed for 3 days, and no light could penetrate the dim room. Missed calls on his phone occupied the screen. He hadn't opened a single one. Time seemed to have hit the pause button on him. Jeremy sat there, head bowed, lifeless. He still remembered the cold tone of the man who took Kimberly away. He said, "We all hoped she'd live. Mr. Green's iron-willed methods effortlessly have made all our efforts go to waste." Angela was stopped by security at the door, screaming at him. "Jeremy, don't you know she'll relapse without her medication? Keeping her locked up is no different from killing her. Depression. Mental hospital." These terms, like countless sharp thorns, twisted and stirred in his thoughts, viciously tugging at his nerves. Adam knocked on the door, finally opening a crack and standing in the doorway. "Brother, are you feeling any better?" "Why?" Jeremy's voice was hoarse, the dull pain in his chest making him wish he were dead. Adam was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it was necessary to check, so..." "The information was fake, wasn't it?" Jeremy's voice was soft. "Adam, when you told me Kimberly had several boyfriends abroad, she was actually locked up in the mental hospital in South City." "I'm sorry, brother. I didn't know." The apology was weak and ineffective. He knew he couldn't blame Adam entirely. If he had asked more questions, maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this. Jeremy had no energy left to listen to Adam's defense. Angela ignored the secretary's objections and pushed the door open. The blinding light made Jeremy squint but didn't stop her. The secretary kept apologizing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Green. I didn't keep an eye on her." "Leave," Jeremy said. The secretary carefully closed the door behind them, and the room returned to darkness. Angela stood there, seemingly unwilling to have any further contact with him. "Mr. Green, there are some things that can be said now." A small gap in the window allowed a bone-chilling breeze to enter. Jeremy sat still, unmoving, quietly listening. Misdeeds always come with consequences, sooner or later. Last year on Kimberly's birthday, I once jokingly asked her who she liked the most in the world. She said first was her mother, and second was Jeremy. Jeremy closed his eyes, feeling those words chill him to the bone. At that time, her illness had just improved. She only needed to take a small pill each day to be as normal as anyone else. So this year, to clear out her mother's belongings, I brought her back. Angela's eyes were red. She always said that the breakup back then was too undignified. She wanted to reunite with you properly, even if just to see her great entrepreneur from afar. Because she knew she was not worthy of you anymore. Jeremy, was she not worthy of you? Do you know how the competition qualifications were fought for? Jeremy's hand slowly clenched as if he saw the truth that could shatter him. At that time, the slot was already predetermined. Kimberly wrote a complaint letter, demanding fairness and transparency, which was how the opportunity fell to you. But in doing so, she offended many people. Later, after her father ran away, she and her mother were tormented by many people. That invisible hand gripped Jeremy's throat, making it hard for him to breathe. Had she been bullied because of this? Angela continued. At that time, you were in another province for a competition and hadn't called back for about a week. So you probably didn't know how chaotic things were here. The Carter family had collapsed. Her father ran away with his mistress, and creditors were blocking their door every day, demanding Kimberly and her mother's lives. Her mother committed suicide, leaving Kimberly to be bullied, which then triggered her illness. During the worst times, I didn't dare to take my eyes off her for a second. She was tormented beyond recognition. Angela stared at Jeremy fiercely. When you had your accident, Kimberly cried and begged me to let her die. How could you expect her to cope? Jeremy's face turned ashen, his eyes shut tight. The memories of these past few months tortured him relentlessly. He had allowed the manager to get Kimberly drunk and sent her to his room. He had lured her into revealing her true feelings while drunk, and then in a depraved act, forged a legally worthless fake agreement just to see her distressed and in pain. Repeated humiliation and mockery. Finally, he had obsessively locked her up in a suburban private hospital. Angela had come to him many times, but he wouldn't even see her. He had questioned her sanity and asked why she didn't die back then. Kimberly's eyes had grown increasingly vacant, often staring at him motionlessly. He had mistaken that she still loved him. But now he realized Kimberly was silently questioning how he could be so cruel to her. Why? Didn't you tell me? Angela broke down in tears. How can you explain this? She was ill, and even living was a luxury. The only thing she could do was to ensure that the people she cared about weren't dragged down by her. She valued your education above all else. That competition was your turning point, a chance she fought for with all her might. She only wanted the best for you. Jeremy, was she supposed to die? Was she supposed to die? That question struck Jeremy like a heavy blow to the heart. It was him who had tormented her, mocked her, and used the contract to humiliate her. It was him who was despicable. We tried many ways to reignite Kimberly's will to live. In the end, we found only one thing that worked for her. Jeremy suddenly couldn't bear to listen further. Angela gave a bitter smile. Your name. She always remembered her great entrepreneur. 10. When I left at that time, I joked with Angela that I would never return to this place. Turned out, making such promises is risky. I fell ill again. In South City, winter is only dry. In previous years it rained ice, but this year it snowed unexpectedly. Doctors and nurses chatted. This year is a cold winter. TSK. The Earth's climate is becoming increasingly uninhabitable for humans. With the new year approaching, the branches outside were bare. Not a leaf in sight. I pressed my face against the window glass, my breath creating a layer of mist. There's someone downstairs. Doesn't he feel cold standing there every day? Angela, holding a cup of hot milk, passed by with a blank expression. Oh really? Maybe he's not cold. She had been in a bad mood lately. Even Dr. Collins was. So every day, I carefully avoided angering either of them. Angela paused, noticing she seemed to have frightened me, and softened her tone. Drink the milk, take your medication after an hour. Dr. Collins said he'll take you to build a snowman tonight. I glanced at the person again, finding him somewhat familiar. Angela pulled the curtain across. Don't look, you might go blind. Okay. I returned to bed, took my medication and played games with a pillow for support. Outside I could hear Angela and Dr. Collins talking. Soon he pushed the door open. I quickly hid my phone sitting up straight. I've taken my medication. The smell of antiseptic filled the room. Eric's gaze swept over me, finally resting on my face. Miss Carter, I won't scold you for playing games. I blushed deeply, slowly pulling out my phone. How did you know I was playing games? I play too. I'm quite familiar with the background music. Eric washed his hands, took off his white coat, and looked at me through the mirror with a slight smile. Aren't you going to put on clothes? We agreed to build a snowman. He was from the hospital's thoracic surgery department. I first met him in autumn. The weather was rarely clear, and I was squatting by the fence, picking up a ball of yarn that had appeared outside. Eric passed by and looked down at me. I was panting from exhaustion. Excuse me, could you help me pick it up? He glanced up at the sign in the yard and said, according to the rules, you shouldn't touch anything dangerous. Seeing I didn't move, he asked, what do you want to do? Play with the flower ropes. Eric checked the time, squatted down and said, then I'll play with you. Afterward, I'll take the ropes away. His lunch break was short. I quietly reached out through the fence and played with him for a while. When he was about to leave, I said, thank you. Later, we met a few more times. He was very busy and ignored me. Until one day, he came again, pulling out the flower rope. Sorry, I've been too busy lately. After that, he started chatting with me. You seem to talk very little. Yeah, I can't say too much. Why? I'm sick. I probably can't say anything happy, and I don't want to dump emotional garbage on others. Eric stared at me without speaking. Later, he came more frequently. Sometimes he looked very tired. I tried to learn a few jokes and told them to him. Each time Eric watched me with gentle eyes. He asked, Kimberly, what's your wish? I hope everyone is happy, including myself. 11. I quickly put on my gear and waited for Eric to put on his down jacket before he took my hand and we went downstairs. There were security gates every few steps here. Only he could take me out. Under the night sky, the snow fell heavily, and my hat quickly turned white. Eric handed me a small shovel. Do as much as you can. Okay. The cold air inexplicably lifted my spirits. I carried the shovel and walked around the frozen fountain. Turning around, I suddenly saw Jeremy standing not far away, his eyes bloodshot and his chin covered in stubble, just watching me. Jeremy. I spoke softly, a little surprised. Jeremy's lips moved. Kimberly, I was wrong. If it were before, I would have proudly and aggressively asked, what did you do wrong? Now I only held the snow shovel, feeling awkward and lowering my head. It's nothing. I had endured too much suffering, and my edges had long been worn down. The wind and snow howled in the dark. Jeremy slowly walked closer, crouching in front of me, his tone hoarse. How can it be nothing? Kimberly, please say something to me. Okay. I thought for a moment and said seriously, I wish us good health in the new year. At that moment, the color drained from Jeremy's face. Tears streamed down his face, trembling. Don't treat me like this, please. I touched his face, it was icy and cold. So, like years ago, I held his face and said earnestly, I wanted to meet you in a dignified way, but it ended up a mess. I'm sorry. It's my fault, Jeremy said. If I had. It's my choice to leave your life, and no one else is to blame. I spoke slowly, feeling a bit sad. At the class reunion, I asked the class leader why you weren't there. I didn't know why he lied to me. I just wanted to hear about you and see if you were doing well. Jeremy cried uncontrollably. I'm sorry, it's me. It's me who did it on purpose. I see. I smiled, not knowing what I felt inside. Kimberly. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me the most. Jeremy held my hand and eventually noticed the scars on my wrist. You don't need to apologize. I didn't want to force you to stay. Many years later, we would have gone through hard times together, argued and counted who owed whom. I patiently removed the snowflakes from his eyelashes. Jeremy, seeing you succeed, I'm truly happy. But I promised to earn money for you. Jeremy held my hand. Without you, what do I need those things for? I blinked, my nose red from the cold. Look, my scarf cost over $100. I have enough money. The light in Jeremy's eyes dimmed and he asked tremulously, It's impossible to go back, right? Jeremy, you have your life, and I have to follow my own path. I won't go back to North City. Words that hurt can't be easily forgotten. Everyone has memories. I am nailed to the pillar of shame, and if I were to go back, every step forward would feel like walking on the edge of a knife. It would be 1,000 times more painful than ending a relationship. Jeremy took a deep breath, holding my hand, warming it like he used to. I'm sorry about the recording. I tempted you into speaking. I didn't touch you that night. My eyes grew warm. Jeremy, just apologize to me, say you're sorry. He was in agony, greedily engraving my face into his memory for one last goodbye. I'm sorry. I gently patted his shoulder, ultimately not saying the words, it's okay. Jeremy, I wish you peace and happiness for the rest of your life. The snow in the sky grew heavier. I turned and walked with all my might, my body swaying in the wind. The howling wind and snow behind me grew fainter. I couldn't tell if it was the sound of the wind or Jeremy's crying. Eric, in a camel-colored coat, stood with his hands in his pockets under the dim streetlight. I could vaguely see his sharp eyebrows and focused gaze. I walked closer. He acted as if he hadn't noticed anything and asked, "What did you see?" I brushed the snow off the brim of my hat, looked up with slightly red eyes. Dr. Collins. Thank you. 12. A few days later, I saw Jeremy's figure in the entertainment news. He had lost a lot of weight. During the interview, he openly shared everything he had done, including how he had forced me and manipulated me into making that recording. He also revealed an agreement. The signatories were him and Michelle. The 2-year engagement period was up, and they had amicably ended their partnership. Neither of them intended to marry. That night was supposed to be the press conference day, according to the agreement, to announce the cancellation of the engagement. This undoubtedly dealt a devastating blow to Jeremy's company, causing its reputation and status to plummet. In the following days, Adam called me. He said, "I'm sorry, Kimberly. I owe you an explanation." He admitted he had misjudged people. Michelle had exposed my situation after harboring private intentions. The creditors who once extorted me for $500,000 had been contacted by Jeremy and taken to a private hospital. Unable to reach them, they turned around and sold the debt to Michelle at double the price. He also expressed concern about Jeremy's work situation and asked if I could return. I gave him the same answer. I had said everything that needed to be said. There was nothing more I could do. 3 months later, my condition stabilized, and I was about to be discharged. Warm sunlight spread over me, and the spring flowers bloomed outside the window. The familiar smell of antiseptic came again. I knew Eric was here. "Do you have any food? I've been busy all day and could use a bite." He had been so busy lately, always coming here looking for food. I unwrapped my wool scarf, revealing a steaming red bean bun. Eric took it without hesitation, tore open the packaging and devoured it. I watched him until he humorously asked, "Why are you staring at me like that? You are easy to take care of." After Eric finished eating, he asked, "Have you considered settling down here?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, I have an apartment available for rent." I thought for a moment. "Are you short on money?" He did seem very sincere. "I don't have much income right now, so I might not be able to afford the high rent." "I'm very cheap," Eric said seriously, making up a story. "There are no neighbors and I'm afraid alone." I blinked. He seemed to be setting me up, but I wasn't quite sure. On the day I was discharged, a spring breeze made my heart feel light. I wore a long-lost smile. As I crossed the street, I forgot to check the traffic lights and was pulled back by Eric, who unceremoniously dragged me to safety. I unexpectedly bumped into his arms. He held my hand and didn't let go. "You?" Pursuing you." His voice was soft and casual with a slight smile, as if he were commenting on the weather. Thump. In the distance, children played with toy drums, making cheerful noise. Thump thump. It was the beating of my heart. My voice wavered, but I bravely looked up at Eric. "I've loved someone for many years and I'm not sure." The wind tousled Eric's hair. His gaze was gentle. "Miss Carter, I've loved someone for many years too. Give me a chance." At that moment, my eyes grew a little misty. "I am not in a good state. I've been ill, and my body." "Miss Carter, you once said you wished everyone, including yourself, to be happy. I hope your wish comes true." A light breeze blew. Sunlight filtered through the treetops and fell on his brows. What once seemed like an unreachable spring was now in full bloom, and spring was in its prime. 13. Jeremy's perspective. In the winter of the second year, Michelle's company announced bankruptcy. The people who had bullied Kimberly were also sent away by Jeremy. After several crises, Jeremy's company finally resurrected. On this day, Jeremy sat alone in the office for a long time. Outside the window, snowflakes fell heavily, and the car lights below formed a continuous stream. This was after he had been working for half a month straight, feeling as if he had lived through a different era. He suddenly remembered that it had also snowed on this day a year ago. Kimberly had appeared at the class reunion. The moment she saw him with Michelle, her eyes were filled with shock and confusion. He had dreamed countless times about that scene. In those dreams, he had made different choices. He had called off the engagement early, reported the incident to the police when the manager tried to drug her. He hadn't forced her to drink or spoken harshly to her. He had, just as Kimberly had envisioned, prepared for a dignified reunion. Kimberly had come back, curling up in his arms late at night, telling him about her experiences from back then, crying with frustration. Jeremy had held her, kissed her, comforted her, and proposed. Later, they had a home together. He and Kimberly had taken wedding photos. In the pictures, she smiled beautifully, her fingers intertwined with his. Every time he woke up from the dream, he lay alone in bed, listening to the ticking of the clock. He would realize that time was moving forward, but Kimberly would no longer be part of his future. She had completely left. On that snowy night in Nanching, Kimberly wished him a safe and happy life, with a sincere and calm gaze. She said she wouldn't be coming back. She felt sad about not having a proper reunion. Her eyes were red as she spoke. Because he had hurt her, she decided to leave. Without reproach or anger, that wish for a happy life was like a gentle knife, deeply piercing his heart, bringing a pain that would never fade. Due to irregular work hours, he developed a stomach illness. When it flared up, the pain was excruciating. That night, he woke up again from his dream, lying on a cold bed with a cold moon outside the window. He vaguely remembered that Kimberly used to watch the moon with him, which felt like a past life. He suddenly missed Kimberly and booked a flight to Nanching the next day. A year later, he was back in this place with the same weather. The wind was strong and the snow was heavy. Pedestrians hurried along the street. Jeremy followed the address and found an apartment. As dusk approached, the lights on the second floor were off. Jeremy stood in a corner waiting. Half an hour later, Kimberly's voice came through, gentle and serious. "The tomato beef brisket at that place isn't good. Next time, buy some beef brisket and I'll cook it for you. Angela likes it too, so invite her over." Jeremy instinctively looked over, and that familiar figure suddenly came into view. She was wearing a little white hat, maybe a little pink or gray hat. Anyway, covered in snow, it was all white. Her figure was a bit fuller, and she walked steadily through the snow. Beside her was a tall figure wearing glasses, always gently watching her. He slightly raised his eyes and their gaze met. The two men, separated by snow and wind, did not speak. "Hey Eric, can you hear me?" The familiar tone was now directed at someone else. Eric withdrew his gaze. "I heard you. You want to make tomato beef brisket, but you burned the pot last time, and I haven't bought a new one." Kimberly's head drooped in disappointment. "Oh, I'm sorry." Eric patted her hat as if patting a cute big white bear. "You should go home. The son hasn't been fed yet." "Where are you going?" "Buying a pot." "And the beef brisket?" "Buying that too." "So urgent." "Yeah, we need to eat tonight." Kimberly trotted into the building. Eric, with a blank expression, followed her. Jeremy waited downstairs for a while, and the snow grew heavier. The sky was gray and oppressive. His stomach began to ache again. Adam called, "Bro." He hesitated. "Your test results are out. It's stomach cancer." Jeremy stood still, not knowing whether he had heard or not. He looked up at the bleak snow and muttered, "Got it." Then he hung up. He stood there as if nothing had happened, continuing to wait, his gaze fixed on the entrance of the building. A warm light spilled from inside, casting a trapezoid on the snow. After a while, Kimberly came down alone. Eric had wrapped her up like an immobile cotton ball. She carried a small red box and walked over with difficulty, handing it to Jeremy. I baked these cookies myself. Take them and eat them on the way. Jeremy took it, suddenly remembering that Kimberly used to love baking many years ago. Back then it tasted awful with a strong egg smell. All the failed attempts ended up in his stomach. She had no talent for cooking. Jeremy had said that Kimberly was banned from the kitchen in their future home. In the blink of an eye, she had become quite skilled. Kimberly sincerely said, "Thank you for the donation to our organization." Jeremy knew her organization helped people with mental illnesses and financial difficulties, so he donated every month. He kept a small portion for his own living expenses. Jeremy replied, "You're welcome." Then he stared at her face. "It's cold. You should go back." "I probably won't come again." Kimberly smiled. "How could that be? You'll be invited to award ceremonies in the future." Jeremy's throat tightened and he couldn't speak. She turned, her snow boots crunching in the snow. Just before she was about to enter the door, she turned back and called out, "Jeremy." Jeremy immediately looked up, his heart suddenly alive. He waited for her to say something. Kimberly smiled at him. "Happy New Year." A simple New Year's greeting. No mention of health or happiness. Jeremy's heart returned to silence. He stood in the cold wind and responded, "Happy New Year." The inn.